Ben Brewster here, breaking down Jhoan Duran. This is one of the more frequently requested breakdowns of the year, and it's pretty obvious why. This dude is just incinerating batters with 104, 105 mile an hour heat. Pretty incredible watch. The transformation, pretty impressive to see some of these highlights and see what he's been able to bring to the table. And just the quantity of guys now in this caliber, the Jordan Hicks, the Ryan Helsleys, Aroldis Chapman back in this range. Just kind of absurd to see seemingly a new guy or two every single year, every few months even, that's starting to push some of these crazy ranges. But we'll kind of go through an overview of who he is, general body statistics, his body transformation, his arsenal, how he throws the splinker, how he throws his curveball, his usage, and then dive into his mechanics, how maybe they've evolved over time, and then also what he's doing from an efficiency standpoint that makes this type of velocities possible. So let's dive right in. He was first signed as an international free agent in December 2014 at the age of 16 to the Diamondbacks out of the Dominican Republic. So when he was signed, he was obviously just a kid, super skinny, had a rocket launcher for an arm even back then. He's now listed at 6'5", 230. So a big dude. We coach guys who play directly with him and give us a little bit of intel into the type of athlete he is. But I've also heard from guys who played with him when he was relatively young with the Diamondbacks, still coming up through that system, working his way up through the lower levels. And what they told me is when he was signed, he was very skinny and very weak. One guy told me that he struggled to do push-ups from what they remembered, but he still threw very hard even back then. He was still throwing in the low mid 90s, even when he was really young and relatively weak. I was able to find information showing that he was listed at 170 at one point, so I'm assuming that was when he was 16, 17, 18 years old, listed at 170. So again, 6'5", 170, very skinny, has always had really this exceptional velocity for his size. But now being how big, how strong he is, and I'm assuming a lot of that velocity development has come from the strength and conditioning work, recomping of his body, the nutrition side of things over this time frame from the age of 16 to now. So over the last 8-9 years, has really made a complete kind of transformation in terms of his body type to go from 170 to 230, adding 60 pounds, obviously no small feat. So that's a big piece of this. Would be remiss to not mention that, given that, yes, we can get into his mechanics, but recognizing how important the strength, the power, the body weight, the body composition side of things are. We always talk about that entire performance puzzle and just how important that weight room side of it really can be, on top of the mechanics side, on top of the data and the pitch usage, all that other stuff as well. So let's dive into his arsenal a little bit. He has a four-seam fastball, he has a splinker, which is really a sinker, we'll talk about that in a second, and he has a curveball, which has some kind of slider characteristics. As far as usage, he's throwing the four-seam about 45% of the time. Pretty good usage percentage for that. 25% of the time he's throwing the splinker, and 30% of the time he's throwing the curveball. For his four-seam, he's averaging 101.8 miles an hour on the year, been up to 104.8 officially on that, with 14.1 inches of induced vertical break and 10.4 inches of horizontal break. He's spinning that at around 2100 RPM and 97% spin efficiency. So obviously exceptional velocity on the fastball, relatively average movement on the fastball. So not getting super high vert, it's relatively average for his arm slot. If we go to the splinker, he's averaging 98.7 miles an hour on this. He's obviously getting pretty crazy movement. The movement is 3.4 induced vertical break on average, 12.3 horizontal break at 1735 RPM. So this is a pitch where he's killing a significant amount of vert. He's starting to get a ton of sink on this pitch, and he's throwing it at 79% efficiency. So essentially what this pitch is this is really kind of a glorified seam shift sinker. If we think about a Clay Holmes sinker, right, it's essentially just a two-seam fastball that's inefficient, and it's able to capture those seam effects and really kill a lot of vertical break. Now I'm assuming has tried a traditional sinker grip and found that widening up the fingers just a hair, he was able to get those seam effects. He was able to get it to that level of inefficiency and kill enough efficiency to be able to get those seam effects. So because he's got that slightly wider grip with the fingers, again, it's not a massive difference, right? He's not throwing a true splitter, he's not throwing a fork ball, right? It's maybe a finger width wider than a traditional two-seam grip, if that. So he is able to still throw this pitch very hard, but by just widening the grip a hair over a traditional two-seam grip, he's able to get that inefficient spin, he's able to get those seam effects, and essentially throw a seam shift sinker with still very exceptional velocity. Now, if he was able to throw it with his fingers a little bit closer together, maybe that's a pitch that instead of averaging 99 is averaging 101 the RPMs, instead of being 1700, might be 2000. And you might see a little bit higher vert, so a little less sink on that pitch, and you might see a little higher horizontal break. So if you were able to throw that pitch, that would be interesting. I'm assuming he's tried that and was only able to get this outlier movement by splitting his fingers a little bit wider. Now, what's interesting is he's seemingly played around with this grip a little bit. So we can see, just 2 examples of the splinker, and we can see on the right here that he actually has both fingers on seams, right? Still, again, slightly wider than the normal grip, maybe a half a finger width wider than a normal grip, but he's on both seams here, and he's actually got the index finger just outside the seam on the left here. So you can see he's kind of experimenting, he's kind of playing around with it. But as that pitch travels on its way to the plate, you can see that inefficient spin. You can see the axis of the ball tilting up and slightly towards him as he releases that ball. So it's about a 79-80% spin efficiency pitch right there. But again, I'm sure he's continually playing around with that orientation of the ball in his hand, and having a seam to kind of pull through to play around with what gives him the best movement. So now we go to the curveball. So he throws a knuckle curve or spiked curveball, and we can go ahead and see that right here. And this is not a highly efficient curveball, and what I mean by that is a 100% efficiency curveball would be something that's a straight 12-6 curveball. Think a Clayton Kershaw type curveball or a Dylan Cease type curveball, where it's might only be 80 miles an hour. It's a big loopy curveball where it's 100% spin efficiency, right? You can think of a true gyro slider where it's that bullet spin, that football spin, bullet spin, that would be 0%. Now, he's throwing something in between those 2 extremes. So it's not the pure 12-6 curveball with the big loopy curveball. It's also not the power gyro slider where it's that bullet spin, and he probably would throw a true gyro slider 93 miles an hour, right? 94 miles an hour. It's somewhere in between. And so what that means is he's still able to get really exceptional movement on this pitch. It's true power curveball movement, but he's still able to throw it very hard. And so the grip that he uses, it's a spiked grip. It's very similar to Lance McCullers' power curveball. It's very similar to Kyle Wright's curveball. Again, 2 guys that we work with. And why this is an important grip is this can be really helpful for guys who maybe are naturally pronators. They aren't as comfortable in supination, where they can't supinate as much, but they still need to be able to find something that can break glove side. And so in his case, you can see the spike allows him to still create that gyro spin and that top spin. So, for me personally, I've always kind of been in this camp where, again, struggle to get anything to move glove side. I'm not naturally good in supination. But again, having this slight bit of supination at ball release, you can see he's got some supination, but he's still relatively behind the ball. And adding that spike in, again, you can see the spike here a little bit better. Adding that spike and the slight supination, is really kind of a hack to be able to get something to move glove side and still throw it very, very hard, especially when you don't have a ton of supination. When you can't throw these big sweepers or anything like that, again, that's a simple way to kind of get the best of both worlds, where you can still get good velocity and still get good break. You're not going to get the biggest break ever as you would with a pitch thrown with maximum supination, and you're not going to get the hardest velocity you could as you would with a true gyro slider. So it's somewhere in between. It's a good blend of both worlds. So let's go ahead and talk about his mechanics now. When I go ahead and I look back at other footage that I can find of him from earlier on, there really haven't been a ton of changes that he's made since this clip from 2018. The biggest change that I was able to find, again, was the body composition change. He's gotten significantly bigger, presumably significantly stronger, significantly more powerful. I'm told by those who have played with him that he's an absolute house at this point. He's powerful, he's strong, he likes to lift, and just really strong, thick dude, good athlete. There are a couple slight changes. One is he has a slightly better lead leg block now, and 2, if you look at his elbow flexion angle at landing, he's a little bit closer to 90 degrees right now, whereas he used to be a little bit further inside, with the ball closer to his ear before. But again, subtle change. We're talking about 5 to 10 degree difference there. Very largely, similar mechanics from what I can tell. So let's dive a little bit deeper into his mechanics and how efficient or inefficient these patterns might be. The first thing that I notice is he has a tendency to have this positive angle at his rear ankle as he starts his delivery. So So I've seen examples of him kind of hooking the rubber specifically. It's a little bit different on most big league mounds where there isn't kind of that big ledge or anything. You know, the rubber can be relatively even with the dirt, so there isn't this huge ledge upon which to hook. So it's hard to say if he's trying to hook the rubber here or if he just happens to kind of preset a little bit more of his weight towards the inside of the foot. But he tends to prefer and tends to seem to like this positive angle at his rear ankle, and that's going to lead to a little bit more of a positive shin angle as well as he gets further along. So again, not entirely sure what his thought process is there, if he's always hooked the rubber, if he's thinking about actively hooking it, which is again hard to tell from some of these views, or if he's just in front of the rubber and trying to get towards the inside. But again, that's a way to create a little bit more tension on the back leg and get the entire center of mass moving forward a little bit sooner. And for any of you who have not tried hooking the rubber, again, it can work really well for certain guys in terms of getting the center of mass moving forward, helping with the drift early. When you set that back angle, ankle angle more lateral and more forward on the inside of the foot, it can really help as you lift your leg, get everything going forward. It can also help as you drop into the back leg, create a little bit more tension and a little bit more of a forward shin angle, a positive shin angle as we might call it, as you drop into the back leg. So there's a lot of potential benefits. There's also some potential drawbacks to hooking the rubber in terms of increasing the tempo too much for certain guys. If you don't have the range of motion in that back ankle, a la Kurt Schilling, right, it can lead to continual issues and ankle injury as well if you don't have the necessary range of motion in that back ankle. So the other thing is he's a great example of both the drift and this seesaw component, the seesaw idea or concept that we've talked about before. And you're probably familiar with the drift. Again, the drift is getting that center of mass moving forward away from the rubber during leg lift. Right, he's a good example of that if we kind of track the belt buckle as he moves forward to peak leg lift. How far has he gone? He's gone about 6 inches forward. So belt buckle here from there. So he's tracked forward about 6 inches. You can kind of watch the head as well. Watch where the head starts. Watch where the head ends. 4, 5, 6 inches, right? He's getting that subtle drift. This is actually pretty substantial drift relative to a lot of pitchers. But the way that I like to think about this seesaw concept, which can really help and click with certain guys that are trying to work on the move, is as you lift your leg, as you move forward, the head is over the front hip, and the head stays over the front hip. As you find the back leg, as you come out of leg lift and find the back leg, the head finds the back hip. So again, as you lift your leg, the head stays over the front hip. That's the forward part of the seesaw. You're in move forward down the mound mode. As you come out of leg lift, you find the back leg, you find the hinge, and your head finds the back hip. That's the opposite end of the seesaw. So there's a initiate forward momentum phase, that's the drift phase, and then there's the shift into stay back mode, and that's the find your back hip. Head centered, stacked over the back hip. And so he's a good, clear example of how that entire process works. If we look at the position of his hinge, we can clearly see he's not a pitcher who has a ton of hip internal rotation, right? He's not creating like these crazy forward shin angles. He's not creating a ton of coil over that back hip. He's still creating tension, right? He's still creating tension and stability through the ground, through the entire back leg, through this entire chain. But again, having not assessed him, I can't confirm 100% that he doesn't have outlier hip internal, but this is what you see in pitchers who have kind of average hip internal rotation, these types of positions. So I'd be willing to bet he has average hip internal. He has some to work with. It's not like Justin Verlander. He has some to work with. He's still kind of tapping out what he has in this position. But again, important point to note is you don't necessarily need outlier hip internal rotation like somebody like Diego Castillo or Josh Hader. You don't necessarily need that in order to still throw very hard. It's about using what you've got and sequencing that efficiently, assuming you don't have like 0 degrees, which can make it a little bit more difficult for a lot of guys. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is as he hits this hinge, as he finds that back leg, finds that back hip, he still has that stable point through the ground. He's got this more kind of positive shin angle. He's loaded and turned over this back hip. So he's wound out all of the tension. He's removed the slack from this back hip. And now he's riding that forward. And when I mean riding that forward, he's staying sideways. His belt buckle stays facing third base. So if we kind of look at his belt buckle this whole time, it's third base, 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 third base. Now it starts to go. So he's riding it out. The other way of looking at this is kind of looking at like the side of the front cleat. He's staying sideways. This whole move is a sideways move. So he's riding that hinge. He's riding that tension. Again, just before landing, everything begins to open and pop open at the last second, starting from the ground up. So we can look at how this rear foot handles that unload. This is a good look. If we zoom in right here, this is a good look at this rear foot eversion concept. So he's not pivoting up and around with the heel, right? He's not pivoting through that big toe and just rotating up and around and kind of popping that heel off. He's peeling, it's almost like he's peeling the bottom of the shoe, the bottom of his cleats off the ground. And so this is that idea of that rear foot eversion. So is he actively trying to just snap the ankle down? No. He's trying to hold the backside. He's trying to hold tension as long as he can. Hold it, hold it, hold it. Stay back, stay back, stay back. At some point, he can't hold it any longer, and the hips begin to pop open. And that popping open of the hips, as his weight attempts to stay back over this backside, this ankle is forced to turn over. And so just, again, a good example of continuing to try to hold the ground, try to hold that tension as long as possible until the hips cause it to release. From there, he's also a great example of this idea of rotating down into landing. And so what I mean by that is he's not just scooting into landing, right? There's some aspect of he's striding out and then able to land down from above into his lead leg. Another way of looking at this is he's got this uphill shoulder tilt during his drive phase. Again, not necessarily an issue, right? There's plenty of pitchers that get this uphill shoulder tilt. It's at landing. Can you get back downhill from this position at landing? And he does. He's able to take this position where he's in this negative shoulder angle, this shoulder tilt, high glove side, and rotate back downhill into landing to where his shoulders are relatively level, relatively parallel with the ground by the time he actually does get to landing. If we look at rhythm, right? Rhythm is kind of a more subjective piece that we can look at. But how does the overall delivery flow? This is one where you kind of have to watch in full speed. I don't think you can fully analyze mechanics in slow motion or frame by frame. I think you need that for pieces of it. And I think you also need to see the overall flow, both in full speed and, potentially slowed down 50%, 75% as well. But let's just watch him a couple times in full speed. Let's watch the overall flow, the overall rhythm of everything. So two pieces that really contribute to rhythm that I'm seeing here. One is that he's using that hand movement and that glove tap to allow the upper half and allow the hands to find that rhythm and sink into the rest of the throw, sink into what the lower half is doing. So he's allowing that leg lift to work hand in hand with the gloves going up and that glove tap. You can see the ball and the hands separate, right? The ball comes out of his glove, hands separate, hands tap, go. And so that becomes a really unique rhythm and timing mechanism for a lot of guys. Jacob deGrom is another good example, countless examples of guys who use this glove tap to create rhythm. And so what that can do is, again, it allows the focus at this point in the throw to be the lower half. It's on that initial forward move, it's on finding the back leg. And again, that glove tap allows the upper body to just kind of slot in, to just kind of relax and float and use it to gain rhythm without having to think about it, without having to think about what the upper half is doing. It allows the focus of the throw to be on the lower half until it's time for the arm to begin to slot in. So that's one important piece. is the glove tap is a really good way to gain rhythm. Another way, which he doesn't do, but another way if you're struggling with the rhythm piece, is out of the windup, going hands over the head. The old school windup is another great way to gain rhythm and help your body feel how all the parts kind of integrate together, as opposed to kind of the upper half on its own timing and the lower half on its own timing, and just really feeling disconnected. It can be really helpful to add in either a glove tap out of the stretch, or wind up, or going hands over the head out of the wind up. If that's something you haven't played with already, you can play with that in a bullpen, and really another simple velo unlock for a lot of guys. And then the other piece that helps add rhythm is you can see kind of the cyclical action of his lead leg. So this is another tip that we'll give guys when they're really struggling with kind of feeling flat-footed, robotic, stiff. They don't feel that rhythm. They don't feel how the overall flow of energy is transferring through their body. Dustin May is probably the extreme example, right? He kicks his leg straight way out here, and then he bicycle kicks it back in and then goes forward. So that cyclical action of the lead leg is another great way to gain rhythm. Again, he's not stiff through this position. He's just allowing the momentum of that leg lift to come up, out and around, naturally bicycle kick, naturally posteriorly tilt his pelvis a little bit in that position. As he comes down, boom, flawlessly finds that back hip, finds that hinge. So again, it's this floating action. The hands are coming up, nice glove tap, cyclical kick. He's just floating, he's relaxed. There's no real tension in this position. This is a floating motion. He's tension free, he's just chilling. Tension free, just chilling. Tension free, just chilling. Boom, finds tension right there. He drops down, he finds the hinge. Now he's locked and loaded. He's gonna ride that tension forward, ride it forward, ride it forward. The arm is still floating, the arm is still relaxed. Hips pop open, core engages, arm engages, and from here it's just unleash absolute hell on the ball once their front foot hits. So one thing that's interesting to talk about with Duran specifically, and with a number of hard throwers, is not all of them actually create what would appear to be exceptional hip-shoulder separation. If we pause him at this position, he does not appear to have exceptional hip-shoulder separation. And there's a couple things going on here. One is that, first off, we have not put him through a motion capture analysis at our facility. Would love to, if he ever came out here, but we have not. So I do not have a number on his exact degrees of hip-shoulder separation. So it's possible he actually has better than appears hip-shoulder separation. You can see he actually gets the hips very rotated into landing. A pitcher if you take this exact degree of separation between where the shoulders are and where the hips are, and all you did was close the hips off 20 more degrees, and the shoulders also closed off 20 more degrees, it would suddenly look like he has a lot more separation, but he wouldn't. He would just have everything rotated less open by landing. So he's landing fairly open with the hips, and by doing so, the shoulders also land a little bit open as well, but it's not crazy open. It's just a little more open than you might see with other guys. So that's one thing. Because of how open he lands, it makes it look like he's got less separation than he does. The other thing is he probably does have relatively average separation, even despite that. He's likely not getting into positions like a Dylan Cease might get into, like Tim Lincecum used to get into, right? And so that's the other piece of this, is while separation is correlated to velocity, more separation is not always better. The guy with higher separation does not always throw harder. It's going to be specifically dependent on your anatomy, your structure. If you're a tighter wound guy and you access every last little bit of range that you have in your body and stretch that rubber band as far as you can, and you're just a tighter rubber band, right? That's the most you're going to get out of it, and that doesn't mean that rubber band isn't going to be very powerful, right? That doesn't mean you're not going to get a huge elastic effect. He's a tighter rubber band. That doesn't mean he's not accessing every last bit of this fascial recoil that he possibly can through this entire, anterior oblique chain, through the fascia, from the ground, through the adductors, through the obliques, through the pecs, through the lat, right? It doesn't mean he's not accessing all of that just because he isn't getting crazy separation. Shohei Ohtani, another guy, good, but not outlier crazy separation like some of these other guys. So that's one piece of it. It's just understanding separation is just one piece of the puzzle. And just because you don't have, crazy loose joints, and you don't have a crazy amount of thoracic rotation, it doesn't mean you can't still throw very hard. So Duran is a great example of a guy who he does not have exceptional mobility. He has good enough mobility, obviously, to throw hard, does not have exceptional ability, and is still able to make it work. So I think is a great learning lesson for guys to see, like, no matter what body type you have, where you fall in that mobility spectrum, outside of the guys that are just ungodly tight, like outside of some of these other guys, like, he has sufficient mobility to get the job done. He's able to create some separation. He's able to get 180 degrees of layback. He's able to get into good enough positions to allow his power, his levers, his athleticism, his sequencing to take over and still produce elite velocities. And then finally, what I wanted to talk about was his decel. So we can watch as he finishes the pitch. Watch how he has that little recoil. Right, watch his arm the first time through here. Watch how he finishes the pitch. Right there has that recoil. So that recoil is not actually happening from his arm, right? He's not specifically getting to that point and then just trying to rip his arm back. That recoil is actually happening from the lower body. So if we watch his pelvis open up, pelvis opens up. As soon as the belt buckle faces the catcher, it doesn't continue to rotate. He doesn't just continue to rotate way over here. The pelvis gets to perpendicular to the catcher, right? Parallel with the rubber, and he sticks it. He sticks it, and then he gets this kind of rebound contraction from that hamstring. So he gets this eccentric hamstring contraction. He follows through over that front leg. And then he gets kind of almost like a single leg RDL. He gets this recoil contraction through this hamstring and through this glute. And so he's got this really abrupt deceleration. He's able to accelerate the pelvis rather. And as soon as he gets the hips open, so he's able to go from here to there very quickly. And as soon as he gets there, he sticks it, sends that energy up the chain, and has a very abrupt decel. So I have a hard time believing he's actively like thinking about decelling, where this is just a product of him trying to throw absolute piss rods, just throw the ball by the hitter, and that intensity and that intent. However, for some pitchers that really struggle with this, where their hips just kind of continue to rotate and they kind of just like fold over like a pancake, and they don't have this kind of like this recoil where that arm just gets whipped off their body, the lead leg braces. One cue that can be really helpful for that is this idea of pimping the finish, and specifically trying to just, kind of give that Latin flair, give that Dominican flair to finishing the pitch, is actually a cue that can, for certain guys, really actually increase velocity, because it's really a deceleration cue. There's other drills, other implements that can help work on this, water bags, etc. But again, the deceleration and the recoil is an interesting piece of how he's able to slow down the pelvis and then continually send that energy up the chain through the trunk, accelerate, then decelerate the trunk, accelerate, then decelerate the arm and the upper half. So a few final points. Duran has efficient mechanics, but they're not necessarily textbook, quote unquote, perfect mechanics, right? We've talked a lot before about how there is really no such thing as perfect mechanics, because what's perfect for one guy is not going to be perfect for another, because they're dealing with different levers, they're dealing with different limb lengths, different mobility, different levels of stiffness, different strength, different power, different levels of unilateral stability, etc., etc., etc. So what's perfect for him is going to be different than what's perfect for Jacob deGrom. But still, his mechanics have certain pieces to them that don't look like Nolan Ryan, they don't look like Jacob deGrom, they don't look like Tim Lincecum. And I think it's important to note that there might still be 1 or 2 or 3 inefficiencies. There might be some minor inefficiencies, even in a guy that throws 105 miles an hour. And that's kind of crazy to think, because, I can remember back to 6, 7, 8 years ago when, it was pretty much just Aroldis Chapman throwing in these types of ranges. And again, moving extremely efficiently, a guy with a lot of range of motion, a guy with a lot of laxity, a guy who, by all accounts, is a complete physical freak in every aspect, of the word. And, you almost couldn't really spot any efficiencies in his movement. And it was like, okay, well, it's the only way to throw 105 to be an absolute freak of the freaks, to have perfect movement, to have lots of laxity. And it's just really cool to see that there's now a number of ways to do this. There's guys who are tighter wound doing it. There's guys who are looser doing it. There's guys who are really tall doing it, guys who are a little bit shorter doing it. And so just seeing these different examples of it, I think, really illustrates the point that even if there are some inefficiencies in the mechanics, lever length can play a big role. I don't know his exact lever length, but he's listed at 6'5". He may have a 6'7", 6'8", 6'9" wingspan for all I know. Mass certainly can play a role, listed at 230. He might even be a tad bigger than that. Power, elasticity, right? All these things can offset or outweigh, a minor inefficiency or two, right? Would I call his lead leg block perfect? I would not call it perfect, but he creates so much momentum going down the mound with the heavy drift, with his high body weight. He's presumably extraordinarily powerful. Again, not having the benefit of some of his weight room numbers or some of these other numbers. And so again, there will always be some give and takes throughout the entire delivery. There might be a slight inefficiency as far as, his back leg kind of shoots off the ground a little bit. Could he segment a hair better? It's possible. But at the same time, he's dealing with certain limitations in terms of how much range of motion he actually has at each joint. And so this might represent almost as close as you're going to get to what's optimal for him, given the constraints of his system, given the mobility that he's dealing with. What I've been told as far as his approach is that he's very much a keep it simple guy. Throw nasty stuff hard over the plate. Don't try to be too fine. Attack the hitter, try to blow it by the hitter, and throw nasty stuff that moves over the plate. Again, easy to say when you throw 105. I understand, but this mentality is an extremely important mentality for guys that are stuck in this rut of trying to be super fine, of trying to break the strike zone into 9 quadrants and beating themselves up if they miss a spot, right? It's a huge unlock for a lot of guys from a confidence standpoint, from a stuff standpoint. Walks go down, and I have MLB pitchers that don't throw 105, but some guys that, they'll be 90, 92 when they kind of get into this fine mindset, and they'll be 93, 95. Or another guy I'm thinking of specifically, he'll be 92, 95 when he's trying to be fine. He'll be 96, 97 when he just goes out there and tries to blow people's doors off and throws it over the plate and gets better results, and his walks go down, his strikeouts go up. So again, something we can kind of learn from that. Even if you're not a flamethrower, it can be beneficial from all perspectives to kind of take that aggressive mentality into your game. So definitely something to experiment with. And then finally, I'm of the opinion that of all the guys that are kind of pushing on this 106 mile an hour barrier, my vote would be on him right now. Again, he's at 4 games this year where he's averaged over 103 miles an hour. On May 24th, he averaged 103.7 miles an hour. So if you're going to ask me what type of pitcher would be the pitcher who hits 106 miles an hour for the first time, I would say a guy who's averaging 104. Like to hit 106, you need to pretty much be averaging 104 that outing. And so he's come very close to averaging 104 in an outing. I'd be shocked if he does not break the all-time MLB velocity record within the next year. So I'll put that on the record here. But again, there's some other guys that are in the running. Jordan Hicks is in the running. Ryan Helsley, could be in the running at some point. Aroldis Chapman, never count him out. So kind of cool to see the arms race for 106. Pretty exciting guy to watch. Pretty electric stuff. And let me know if you have any additional comments down below. Anything else you see in his mechanics that I didn't touch on, anything I said that you really strongly disagree with, any further questions you have from a training standpoint, let me know down below. And then finally going to put a little plug in for our mental skills course, which is going to be live within the next several weeks. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be doing podcasts and posting some videos on here discussing, some of the different variables that we cover within that course. But again, that's going to be a big game changer for the industry, being able to start to break down some of these less talked about topics and bring the mental game to you in a really digestible way. So really excited about that. That's been 8 months in the making. Keep an eye out for that. Hopefully you guys got something out of this breakdown. I'll see you guys in the next one. Again, don't hesitate to let me know your thoughts, and if you have any suggestions for who I should break down next, would be happy to take that into consideration as well. I'll see you guys next time.